Been waiting for this episode, okay? Talk to you today about 2025 IEP new rules, same fight. And we're always told nothing's changing, everything's the same. But in 2025, everything is shifting from federal regulations to Department of Special Education being dismantled with the protections that we use as a leverage to get support for our children, to state level laws that actually, some of them are helping us, some of them are not. It's complicated. Parents focus their energy right now. So in today's episodes, we're going to get into it, okay? We're going to talk about federal regulations. We're going to talk about state regulations. And of course, you already know, I always love to give people tips and tricks on how to navigate every space to support yourself and your child. So let's go. Federal shakeup. All right now. So what do we know so far? All summer long, I've been talking about the Department of Education. And during the furlough that's still happening right now, the Trump administration has decided to lay off the special education department. So what does that mean? Long story of it, we don't know what could possibly happen, but we know that the fight's not over just because the employees were laid off. Just like the consistent conversation all summer long, the Department of Education is closing. The Department of Education is closing. It's kind of like the story of Chicken Little. The sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. Same thing with the Department of Education, right? You keep seeing it in the news, and that's to convince you that it's actually closed, and it's not. Okay, it is not closed. So what we have is a slow trickle of breaking down and weakening the Department of Education. And what does that mean for our children? It means that IDEA oversight weakens. The enforcement becomes uneven across states. And what that means is you can have one state where they make sure that the children receive occupational therapy, or you may have a state that decides that children will be tested for dyslexia if their test scores are within a certain range. That's state to state. But when you have the Department of Education, they are mandating certain laws to be dispersed across the states. They are setting the bar of service. So when you talk about the Department of Education, Special Education Office being closed, we're talking about is the services that we have gotten used to, or the services we're fighting for our child to receive, will no longer be standard. Which means that you could be in a state, someone could be in New York and gets a service, and then you're in, let's say, DC, and you won't get it. So that's the first thing to note about why is the Special Education, Department of Special Education and the Special Education Office is important. Now, with that being said, the tentative conversation is that they're going to move IDEA to HHS, right? So they're going to move IDEA to Health and Human Services, which is going to shift special education into a medical model, weakening the educational mission. Now, two things at this point. One, let's get into what IDEA is, just in case we forget, okay? So IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the federal law that guarantees students with disabilities the right to a free, appropriate public education and necessary services, okay? Now, IDEA is educationally driven, which means you want to ensure that a child has access to education. Now, I just mentioned that they want to move IDEA to HHS, which means it's a shift from special ed into a medical model, right? So what that means is instead of looking at what hinders the child to get access to academics, they're looking at the symptoms as the problem. You follow me? I'm going to give an example. So my son was in a special education school that was medically based, which means that even when he was doing therapy inside the school and therapy outside the school, his behaviors were actually becoming normalized compared to a regular child, right? So because of this, in a regular school setting, he would be fine. But because he's in a medically based school, every little thing that he does, they're looking at it as it needs to be remediated. They're looking at it as there needs to be some kind of medical intervention. So that becomes a small issue when the mission or what people are watching is not the access to education. It's more of how the symptoms are hindering the child. They're looking at the symptoms, not the other nuances that occur when it comes to a child having difficulty accessing education. Okay? So you may have the child who has dyslexia. So dyslexia, lack of phonemic awareness, you may need an Orton-Gillingham program. The child may need to have a psychologist so they can deal with any trauma that they've received for the amount of time that they did not know how to read and the shame, right? Educational based. These are the pieces that's going to hinder that child from moving forward academically. Now, medically based. Same child with dyslexia. So now we're looking at the behaviors. We're looking at the behaviors that the child is exhibiting that may hinder them in actually participating in the dyslexia program, right? It's just how the shift, what we're looking at, okay? Now, the next thing on the federal shakeup, right? Funding block grants and vouchers. So there are fewer protections, possible cuts, especially impacting low income and minority students. What is a block grant? Let's talk about that for a minute. Block grants mean states get a lump sum of federal money with fewer rules on how it's spent, which can reduce accountability for special education. So before this 2025 shakeup, the block grant would specifically say special education and is to be used for A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? Now, because there are fewer protections, a state can receive money, but they don't actually have parameters or rules and regulations on how to spend that money. Okay? Think about it. Okay? Now, also the vouchers are programs that give families public funds to use for private schools. Vouchers are programs that give families public funds to use for private schools, but they often don't guarantee the same rights or services under IDEA. Vouchers. So you may have a voucher if your child was in a public school setting and with support from a nonprofit or your lawyer or you just a bomb advocate, you were able to get your child a private placement, which means that they received a voucher. They received a voucher to put them in a private school. The voucher is basically the amount of money that the state receives in a public school setting for your child. Hypothetically, let's say your child's seat is worth, a couple of years ago, it was $35,000 per seat. When you add the special education component, that means your child might get another additional $10,000, $15,000, which means your child's seat is potentially worth $45,000. So that $45,000 converts into a voucher, which is then used to place your child in a private placement. So now that is at risk because now you have schools that might take the voucher, but they don't have to follow the IDEA regulations and rules anymore because why? Because the special education office is no longer there. Okay. We moved from a modality of education to medical. I'm just telling y'all. Ooh, it's so deep. Now, this is one of the things that has been concerning me. Oh my goodness. Since, honestly, January, February. Okay. I'm watching affirmative action, DEI roll back. And I'm like, oh, woo, woo, woo. Whoa, what is it all for? What does it mean, right? So in an educational setting, rolling back the affirmative action or DEI, rolling back these regulations creates a space where our children are at risk of getting harsh discipline and misidentification for Black and brown students. This is when you start talking about our children getting lost in a system and being pushed harder into a prison pipeline modality. This rollback can also exacerbate existing racial disparities in general school discipline by removing the federal incentives for schools to track and correct policies that disproportionately harm students of color. Okay, so got rid of affirmative action. We roll back DEI, those protections that we have gotten used to support our children are no longer there. But then you have this additional piece where part of ensuring equity in school settings is reporting to the Department of Education. The Department of Education is no longer there, or the special education office is not there. That means that now the schools will no longer have to track. It's voluntary, which means now harm could be done to our children because of attendance regulations. That could be done because of a diagnosis that has been or has not been diagnosed or on paper, right? Now we're talking about harsher discipline when it comes to dealing with our children. Okay, so the next thing that's happening at the state level is proposed removal of federal disproportionality data reduces transparency and accountability for identifying and addressing racial disparities in the discipline of students receiving special education services. So now we're talking about some of the things that occur to children who are in special needs programs. If you have been blessed and you have not seen those things, in my studies, as well as what I've seen in school settings, what it looks like is a child that's being isolated by themselves. No one's talking to the child. The child could be punished, or the child's just sitting there by themselves, not learning. It could also be your child being restrained. Your child being placed in a room that could be really small, like a closet, as a way of calming them down if a child has ADHD and they're excited. This is protectance of your children in a discipline. Now, Black and brown children are already at risk of, I'm going to say, extreme discipline just because of the narrative throughout history in regards to Black and brown children and people, which means that we need more discipline. We're unruly. So that's your general child. But then you add on a diagnosis of ADHD, which has characteristics that tend to be negative. And then you have a whole nother level of hodgepodge of mess, right? Because now what happens is you can restrain a child because I was scared or because they did this. The rules and regulations that protect those children are no longer there, which previously have been reinforced by the Department of Education and the Special Education Office. Okay, is it all coming together? Is it all coming together, guys? I'm telling you, listen, when I have been sitting here watching this like all summer long, I'm like, what? Yes, this is what's going on, okay? Now, one of the other things that's happening that I have been tracking is RSA, which is your Rehabilitative Services Administration. Because one of the questions I had was, how are they going to break down all these services? In this conversation, because I'm talking about special education, this is primarily just talking about the dismantling of the Department of Education in regards to children who are receiving special education or services. Rehabilitative Service Administration administer services for high school students to adults, and they support the transition between being a teenager and a young adult. And they do that by providing such services as vocational rehab. So now you have your high school student who's actually part of their schedule is to go to a voc rehab program or an apprenticeship. When they get older, same thing. They help them find job placements. If your child is college bound, they have grants to support the children with their tuition, as well as any additional services. For my son, I think he received $15,000 a semester. He was also given other things, like he had a pen that would take notes. If you need a computer, they will also pay for that. So this is what RSA does. So here's the thing that a lot of parents, especially my clients, I find to be really, really interesting is that a lot of parents don't know about RSA. Okay. And it's supposed to be on your child's IEP when they're in high school, right? Especially by the time they're 15. Usually the process starts at 14, but most definitely 15. And what happens on the IEP is you are working with RSA as well as the school to make sure that your child is either going into a job or they're going into college. And those milestones will be in their IEP. And it's so important because sometimes as parents, we don't know. We are waiting for people to tell us, right? That we're waiting. And sometimes it never gets done. Sometimes people tell you about RSA when your child's in 11th, 12th grade. What's lovely about every RSA program is they're different. For my son, he's had his RSA person since he's been 14, and they supported him because RSA also has summer programs. And my son participated in a summer program, and RSA in DC had a different pot of money to pay the students. So while regular students, I think they were getting like $12 an hour, my son was getting $15 an hour, and that was through RSA's vocational fund. And the program that was approved for that programming. He also was given a counselor, and I have been talking to his counselor since 10th, 11th, 12th grade. The counselor will come to your child's school, talk to your student, talk to you, talk about plans, how to support, make sure that the child has a summer job. I mean, everybody has different experiences. My experience as a parent who didn't know anything with my almost 30-year-old to knowing all the things now, I haven't had a terrible experience. Now, RSA, depending on the agency, the state, they can slow roll it. But as usual, you just stay on top of everything. You hold people accountable. You'll get what you want. Now that I've done a brief rundown of Rehabilitative Service Administration, let me tell you this. Okay, so what is proposed, and I'm saying proposed because we already know what it's like in the news and the media, but what's being proposed is that RSA will be moving to the office that handles employment, state to state. And what does that mean? That means that it's going to be difficult for your child to be receiving RSA services in their high school when the RSA has moved to the employment office. They already are overwhelmed. I mean, between unemployment, finding positions for regular students, now you're going to move the rehabilitative services to that office as well. Once again, a breakdown of a cohesive service. One of the reasons why the special education office was started was not just to maintain or create an equitable experience for parents. It was to take all of the pieces that were all over in different administrations and put them under one umbrella, which makes it easier for you as a parent to understand how to support your child to move on to post-secondary or vocation with support. So what's at risk with that move is the job coaching, employment preparation, independent living support could all fall into the cracks if education and rehab stop coordinating, because basically that's what we're talking about. Now, on that note, what can you do? My son's a senior, so I'm kind of like taking a moment because I really want to support parents if your child is in the 10th, 11th, 12th grade. These changes are happening. However, they're not here yet. They are not here yet, okay? So if you have a child ages of 14 and 18, you need to push your schools to make sure that you have goals on your IEP for rehabilitative services for your child, right? What does that mean? Why do you need to do that? Because if that happens where they actually move the services over to the Department of Education, it's on your IEP, so you already know what to expect and you don't have to go in there and start a new fight, right? A new stage of advocacy because you already have it. So if your child, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, your job is to go connect with your child's special education coordinator, and ask them, does your child have RSA goals? And if not, when can you get a meeting to get them? One of the things that I have been thinking and reading and researching since this whole conversation with special education in the Department of Education issue is, what can parents do? And one of the main things that you can do while everything's shifting under our feet is to make sure that your IEP is tight. If you have if you have the things that your child needs the most on your IEP, that gives you a guide. But when it's in the ether and it's not there and you don't know what to do, by the time you figure it out and it's moved to another office, that's a whole nother journey. And you're going to have to really, really dig into it. And it's going to be a lot because it just shifted over. So that office has to get themselves together. They have to hire people. If that's what they're going to do, we don't know what's going to happen. But if you have your stuff tight now, or as tight as you can get it, that gives you a little bit of leverage. You're not going in on a blank slate, okay? And if you want to know more about RSA, let me know, right? It is being threatened right now, but the more you know, the more you can advocate. So now let's move on to state level shifts in 2025 so far. Okay, so we talked about the federal. Now let's talk about the states. Okay, so states are doing things very interesting to me. And I see some states like California, and I'm like, okay, I see you. Okay, I see some states like Jersey, and I'm like, okay. But then I see other states like DC, Georgia, and I'm like, oh, okay, I gotta watch it. All right, let's get into it, okay? So, California has started an early transition plan, which started at age 14, not 16. And that's one thing about RSA, depending on the state, what age they want to start it, right? So this is a new 2025 change in California. Previously, federal law required transition planning by age 16. Parents should know they now have leverage to begin career and college prep 2 years earlier. In other states, you can still request earlier planning, even if not mandated yet. Okay. Now, California also has a ban on prone restraints. So it's safety focused. They demand positive behavior supports instead. So remember I said about children being restrained. So California's looking at that and they're like, okay, those are banned. Yes, people. Yes, everybody. There are states that do restrain our children. Okay. So this is part of 2025 update in California to strengthen student safety. In previous years, prone restraints were still permitted in some cases. Now families can insist on safer positive behavior supports as their standard. Okay. So in Jersey, they have a transparency and pre-meeting notes. So the agenda is supposed to be given to the parent 2 days in advance, which gives the parent more prep time. I love a good prep. Okay. I prep days in advance because they got their notes and I got mine. I'm just saying. So back to it. 2025 in New Jersey, this law guarantees parents earlier access to IEP meeting agendas. Before, parents often receive little or no notice. Now you have a legal right to prep time. Okay, Jersey, pay attention. So California also has a neurodiversity anti-bullying, which requires training, resource posting, and updated language. So this 2025 change in California expands school responsibility around anti-bullying and inclusion. In earlier years, requirements were less specific. Now schools must provide training in visible resources and update language to better reflect neurodiversity. Now let's talk about one of my favorite topics of discussion, discipline and attendance. Now, I mentioned the school to prison pipeline risk. If you're not familiar, briefly, there have been numerous studies over the years about the school to prison pipeline for minority students. Even to the extent I read one study that stated that they can tell through academic testing, environment, income, if the child at the age of 5 is going to be a criminal. So this is like a baseline for school to prison pipeline risk. So some states are changing discipline and attendance rules in a way that can unintentionally push families toward child welfare or juvenile justice systems. For example, DC, my hometown. DC have included referring families to the Department of Human Services for excessive and unexcused absences. And many districts have strict notification and escalation steps after a small number of unexcused absences. Now, here's what the important part is, because I believe during the summertime, I saw an article about Georgia. And when I was reading that legislation that was proposed and passed, it stated that an absence is an absence. It used to be where you had unexcused and excused, and if your child was sick, then it falls under excused. Some of these new regulations are saying an absence is absence. They don't care if your child is sick. That creates a very unsafe, and it makes sped children and families vulnerable, being reported to Department of Child and Family Services, depending on the child, right? So you have some children who have 504s or IEPs because they have severe asthma. They have sickle cell. You have some circumstances where your child has severe anxiety. Your child is on spectrum. It's 1,000,001 reasons why your child might have an excused absence due to a medical reason. So this causes concern, especially as a person who used to work for Department of Health and Human Services. So I used to work for DC Department of Health and Human Services. And we had training with Child Protective Services. And they would tell us like what to look for when we're reviewing documentations, when we should refer families to them. And, at the time, it just didn't kind of make sense to me, while they were be asking us, because like, what can we see? And I had a couple of cases after that where I was like, okay, I can see where they're saying that we should have been able to intervene because the family was in front of us. So now take my circumstances and put it into a educational environment. It's a flag. Oh, they're sick. They're sick a lot. Yes, we know they have a diagnosis, but we are being told that we have to report you because now there isn't any excuse anymore. So we have to report you. It's something to be aware of. I'm saying to you to make sure that you watch how your truancy letters, mandatory reporting, and escalation protocols are being used locally, where you live. Google it. Ask ChatGPT, okay? Because my chat's my favorite friend, okay? Find out what's going on locally to protect yourself. Okay, because these enforcement pathways can lead to child protective services involvement, right? By saying that your child is truant or absent, which means that you are neglectful as a parent. Be aware, while some states like California are moving to reduce punitive language and truancy policies, others are increasing enforcement or creating clear escalation steps for Black and brown families. Okay? So pay attention. As one of my favorite movies, Sister Act, better wake up and pay attention. Rules are changing frequently. And the other thing with these rules and regulations is, depending on when you catch it, you can make sure that you protect yourself and your child. Just because they say there's only unexcused, that doesn't mean that's the final answer. You can go get yourself a pro bono lawyer. You can get a doctor to write up documentation showing that your child has a medical reason to be out of school, right? Don't just accept, okay, this is the rule. Advocate. And in the states where these changes are being made, trust and believe there is a nonprofit or a organization nationwide or statewide that can support you. One thing that's very clear with all of these changes is that for us, and when I say us, organizations, advocates, parent advocates, special education advocates, we are not taking it laying down. We are in the trenches and we're doing our best to support our children, our school systems. If you don't take away anything except this, most important part is, just because it says this is the law, you go get yourself a pro bono lawyer, or you go and find your nonprofit organization of advocates. And I will drop that in the show notes because I do have a list of organizations that support parents. They'll support you with IEP meetings, with any legal documentations or steps, but most definitely with these changes, we still have power. We're more powerful moving together, but we're also powerful when we are all advocating. We're all moving. We may be moving separately, but we're all moving. And that's most important. Not letting the government lead us. I have really gone in about federal and state. So what does it all mean, Janie? What are we doing? How can we support? So I just went on my little tangent because I'm passionate about this stuff, y'all, about making sure that you advocate. But here's some other things I want everyone to listen to. Grab a pen and paper, okay? Or just keep playing this over and over again. Here it is. The main thing you have to do is be strategic, right? Pick battles that matter the most. Example, you are, let's say for instance, you have been advocating for your child to get an aid. Last year didn't go so well. You came in this school year, they got new staff, new teachers, and they're like, so let's see what happens. Okay. You know your child needs an aid. You know what happened last year. They're saying, let's see what happens. This is a perfect time for you to start pulling everything that happened last year together, right? Pull it all together. Be strategic. Pull it all together. Call yourself a meeting, right? You're going to make sure that you have your IEP reports, which you should be receiving every report card, which shows have your child made progress on their goals. You're going to bring report cards, right? You're going to bring that cute fall and spring assessment, right? Each state has a different one. These are the things that you're going to show that your child needs support, right? If your child has a BIP, which means they have a behavior intervention plan, and that right there will get you an entire aid. But be strategic. I'm using the aid as an example, but it's the thing that you feel like is going to change your child's life. It's that thing that you've been fighting for and they keep trying to play the long game with you. Be strategic, which means go in with a plan and don't let them deter you, because they are going to say triggering things. Don't be deterred. Be strategic, right? Also pick your battles. So let's say the day before you get into that meeting, something happens in the classroom. When you start the meeting, don't talk about that first. Okay, no, don't talk about that first. Handle your business on the front end. And then you can end it with what happened, but don't lead with that. Next, tell your personal story from the perspective of what's happening now. Now, whenever I coach my clients and they start telling me what they're going to tell the school, and it's literally like they open up a history book of all the ways the school system has failed them. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not going to get you what you want. Because as soon as you start talking about what happened in the past, what didn't work in the past, they slowly zone you out. So you don't want to do that. You want to talk about what's happening now. You can talk about last year from a certain perspective, which means because the school year just started, it's only been, 2 months, depending on the state, 3 months, depending on your state, that you can still pull from last year because that's how you ended it. It's so quick ahead. But when you start talking about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the kindergarten teacher, this teacher, that teacher, they zone you out. So it needs to be strategic, once again, but it needs to be about what's happening right now. What's happening now? How's it affecting your child now? For instance, let's say right now, my son is having difficulty in math. That's the problem right now. Last year, he had difficulties in math. However, at the end of the year, we decided that he needed to get a tutor and that he needed to get a timeline in a multiplication table and let's say a calculator, right? And it didn't carry over to the next year. So I'm talking about, well, this is what worked before and now you're not doing it, right? Whenever you're talking about what happened before, you want to look at it from the perspective of what was working. You can talk about what's not working if they bring it up as a solution and you know that doesn't work. Make sense? But you're telling from your perspective and you want to talk about what's happening right now. When you reflect on what's happened before, it's about how that affects what's happening right now, how it can support what's happening right now. I know we traumatized. I know we are. I know we traumatized. I know every time we get in a meeting, we got to fight. But we cannot go down the hole because they are not with us on that. And as soon as we say that, they immediately start thinking, well, we're not part of the problem. We didn't do that. Like, I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm so sorry that happened to you. And, we're going to start fresh. So now it's kind of like womp, 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 womp when you're talking. So always be very clear on what is it you're going to talk about. And anything that you bring in from the past, how is it affecting now? Only talk about things that went wrong if it's not being provided right now. It's on the IEP or it's not being provided right now. And you had a meeting, they said they want to put it there. These are the things that you want to bring up. Share what was worked in the past at home and in their classrooms. So you also want to be strategic in a way where you're talking about not just what happens in the classroom, but what happens at home. If your child has an outside team, which I'm a whole advocate about, you want to talk about what works on their outside team. Outside team could be the tutor. It could be an occupational therapist. It could be the psychologist. It could be the physical therapist. Any of those people who are giving you tips and tricks, you want to bring those into the meeting. You also want to make sure if you're bringing those tips and tricks into your meeting, you have their contact information because sometimes schools are willing to coordinate. Okay? Now, the other thing you want to do, find your community and ask for accommodations. You are not alone. So connect with local parent advocacy groups. I just said that before, right? Many of them offer free legal support and training of your rights. Now, with that being said, let's talk about something for a minute. You ever sit in a meeting and people like SPED, right? SPED, IDEA, like they're throwing around these acronyms, and you're just sitting there and you're listening. I knew a bunch of the acronyms. Clues. I'll get some context clues. Did you know that you could be accommodated as well with your child, which means you get a list of acronyms translated, or a meeting time that works with your job, ask for it. This model is self-advocacy for your child and removes barriers for your full participation. So if they give you a meeting time and that doesn't work for you, you need to tell them that, right? If you can't be there in person, but you can be there online, ask them, can you do a virtual? We are in a whole new world, and virtual should always be an option, or you can do it over telephone. You want to be an active participant, which means you want to request the IEP in advance. You want to get an acronym list if you need it. Sometimes it's the small things. It doesn't seem like it's that serious. But at the same time, is it breaking down your self-confidence? Sometimes when we don't know, but we have 1,000,001 things that we're trying to get accomplished, we're just like, it's not that deep. But at the same time, on a subconscious level, it can be that deep. It could be the space between you leaning in and you leaning back, okay? The other thing you want to do is watch your timelines, right? 60 days to evaluate your child once you put in a request for new services. It's 30 days for the IEP to be revised, for them to meet with you. Watch these timelines now, especially when we're talking about the special education department office is no longer there. Keep note. I have a planner that I sell that helps you keep track of these times and these dates, right? And with that being said, you also want to keep track of dates and interactions. I am a whole advocate of keeping everything documented, from a conversation you have with the teacher in the carpool lane to sitting in a meeting and they tell you they're going to do this, and that. And then the next meeting is like, it just went away. Well, that's an email or a note that you take. And whenever you're in IEP meetings, people, oh my goodness, take notes. Always take your own notes. A lot of times, like I remember when I first started going to meetings with my clients, I always took notes. When I first went into a meeting for myself, I started taking notes, and the SPED coordinator said, oh, I'll take the meeting notes. No, you won't, because your notes are not going to say what my notes say. So I'm an advocate of taking notes. Now, if you are not a note taker, okay, and you got a whole smartphone, there's so many apps on there that you can use to record the meeting. Just ask them, you want to get the meeting recorded. If you're doing virtual, to ask them, you want the transcripts from Zoom. Every conversation is an interaction. It could be every letter that's sent, every little nuance is an interaction that should be noted for your child's protection. I'm going to give you an example. I received an email from my son's principal, at least like years ago. And in the email, she said that, in the carpool lane, he had an interaction with another student, and it seemed like he was being aggressive and some other stuff. So I asked him what happened. He explained to me that the student had pinched him, and that he was telling her to let him go, and he wouldn't. So when I was dropping him off in the carpool lane, she was there, and I explained to her what happened. And afterwards, I sent her an email saying, it was very nice talking to you about, the situation that happened yesterday, and explained to you what happened today. And you said that this is the recourse, or these are the actions that you would take. Why did I do that? Because the conversations we have in the carpool lane, or just between us, seems to be like everything's okay until you're sitting in a meeting and they're talking about the incident in isolation, like y'all never had a follow-up conversation. So you always want to keep up with those as much as possible, especially when you're not satisfied. And when I say not satisfied, something's missing. Your child isn't making progress for said reason. You're having difficulty for said reason. There's something happening and you're in it. It could be you feel like your child is being pinged for behavior. It could be that you feel like your child might be getting bullied. It could be that you feel like your child is being singled out. It could be your child's not making progress. It could be 1,000,001 reasons. Every time there's an interaction, write it down. Okay, just do yourself a favor, because if you don't write it down, it's something that you said, that they said, that they said, that they didn't say. Okay, so also I want you to make sure that you scrutinize those discipline laws in your local area, okay, and know your MDR rights. I already talked about this, but I want to make sure that I say it again. Make sure that you are paying attention to report cards when it comes to attendance. I mean, even before these things started happening, I always had to pay attention, because in DC, the rule is if your child has 10 unexcused absences within a school year, then that's an intervention. Intervention being they report you to CPS. Intervention that they call you to talk to you, but that's an intervention. What's the law in your state? Find out. What is the law in your state? You need to have a baseline of what you're looking for, right? I said before earlier about making sure that you keep records, but make sure you keep records of your medical appointments, right? Sensory needs, transportation barriers. So your child is given a bus, or you'll have a car, anything that is related to their diagnosis. Make sure you document everything. You provide medical notes when appropriate. Listen, even if they say you're not going to take a note, you want it in their file, okay? Request accommodations so absences are excused. Even if they're not excused, you always want to make sure you send in that doctor note. You're going to have schools tell you, you don't need no doctor note. That's fine. The reason why you want them to have it is to say that you gave it to them. And you're going to go home, and I don't care if it's a piece of paper, your computer, anything you want to write down, drop the doctor's note off. Of course, make a copy, okay? Drop the doctor's note off to said person at the front desk to place in records. Another little thing I like to do is send an email. Shoot, everybody does email now. Use that as a tracker. You want to make sure in these circumstances when it comes to CPS and attendance that everything's tight. And of course, like I said before, ask in your IEP or 504 meeting, discuss the attendance barriers that you may have. Okay. Now, the other thing that you can do is you can request attendance accommodation. Right? Now, you can do this in a meeting, or you could do it via email. And I'm going to read a sample advocacy email, and I will also provide the template in the show notes in my library resource. But here is a sample email. Dear Principal IEP team, I am requesting an IEP/504 meeting to address my child's attendance challenges related to their disability. We would like to discuss accommodations such as excused absences for medical sensory needs, flexible scheduling, and a clear communication procedures so absences are not misinterpreted. Please confirm a date for this meeting within the required time frame, right? So then you want to have a follow-up email, and that's going to say, thank you for meeting with us. I want to confirm that the team agreed to 1, mark absences excused when related to medical sensory needs, 2, provide makeup work flexibility, and 3, explore transportation supports. Please include these in the IEP 504 plan. Documentation is attached to your records. Okay. These 2 letters are key in making sure that you protect yourself and your child from attendance so you won't get reported to CPS. Okay. Because that's just 100% real. I remember the reason why I really started paying attention to attendance is because one of my sons, we hit 10 days, and it was weird because I didn't know, I think it was like early in my journey. I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know it was that intense, but somehow we had got to 10 days. And when we were sitting in the IEP meeting, and I was advocating for, I believe a tutor, it was pointed out to me, well, we see that he has excessive absences. And I was like, no, he doesn't. Well, he is at 10 absences. And technically, we could report you to CPS. wait, hold up. Hold up. What you talking about? Right? I quickly went home and did my research. I was like, okay, won't ever catch me like that again. Won't ever use that against me again in a meeting to say that my child isn't where they should be because they missed 10 days of school out of the entire school year, placing onus on me. Never again. So that's why when it comes to mean attendance, I don't play. Okay. So buckle up, buttercup, and send out these letters. Okay. Now, I know that everything has been a lot. I've been talking for a minute. I think it's one of my longest podcasts for myself. But as per usual, I'm always saying that as parent advocates, we don't give ourselves enough grace. And I want you to take a moment and understand that baby steps, right? Baby steps could be a successful documentation. It could be a successful documented email. It could be a pre-written list of questions for an IEP meeting, or simply making it to the meeting prepared. Okay? Small steps. With my now 18-year-old senior student, I remember my first IEP meeting, and they killed me. They killed me. Like everything that the psychologist said that he needed, they were not trying to give it to him. I had like all my documentation, and they had all these reasons why they weren't going to provide it. And after that, I was like, okay, I know what I need. And I went and I got the validation. So I went and got additional doctor's reviews based on the testing that they had, they gave me, right? And then I found out my son has this dyslexia. I found out he was on spectrum. And every little letter, every little meeting, every little thing was a win. Small wins, because I showed up. Listen, I showed up. I showed up prepared. Every time I learned something new in a meeting because they were denying me something, I would come back tighter and tighter. Small steps. And now my son is 18 years old. And listen, y'all, okay, my son was diagnosed, he was in second grade, and he couldn't read at all. And by the time we dug in, and I say we, I mean team of ASAR, the home team, the team I created, by the time he left that school in 5th grade, ASAR was on like high school comprehension and 7th grade reading. And then you fast forward, and now he's a senior. He got 3.8 GPA. Okay, 3.8 GPA. And he's an excellent creative writer. He's an artist. And he's applying to Yale or Cornell. I'm not going to say I didn't see this. What I am going to say is this is the result of every little small thing and me never giving up. So small steps, steady steps. That's what you need, right? To keep your pace going, to keep yourself sane, to get the wins. Because it's not a race, y'all. It's not a race. Okay, it's a marathon. It's not quick. It's slow but steady. Advocacy isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. Systems are designed to wear you down. But when you pace yourself and build community, you move from reacting to leading. And on that note, okay, it's the cipher. Y'all already know what it is. And the song for today's episode is Fight the Power by Public Enemy. And I was listening to this when I was just getting all my thoughts out my head. And, and I look up the lyrics and I'm like, yup, this is it. So let me give y'all the lyrics, okay? So got to give us what we want. Got to give us what we need. Our freedom of speech is freedom or death. We got to fight the powers that be. Let me hear you say, fight the power. No, we're not the same because we don't know the game. What we need is awareness. We can't get careless. You say, what is this? My beloved, let's get down to business. Mental self-defense, fitness. Don't rush the show. You got to go for what you know. Make everybody see in order to fight the powers that be. Let me hear you say, fight the power now. Okay. I love that song back in the day. And it ain't changed. And that's what we're in. We're in a fight the power mode right now. Okay? And because we're here right now, you know, I think of a quote by Malcolm X, and it says, there is no better than adversity. Every defeat, every heartbreak, every loss contains its own seed, its own lesson on how to improve your performance the next time. All right, y'all, on that note, remember, be patient with yourself and your child. And this year, don't just prepare for an IEP meeting. Prepare for a system that's shifting around you. Start strong with my free IEP guide, 5 secrets to mastering the IEP process. It's in the show notes because this fight is long, but you're not in it alone. Until next time.